is that in the end, we have full control of the outcome. We can't control the hurricane, but we can certainly control the outcome from the hurricane.
Hello there, it's me, Steve Meller, and welcome in to GrowthReady, the podcast that allows high performers to reveal the reality behind what it means to ready yourself for growth, the personal and professional challenges along the growth journey, while also allowing the high-performance executive coach in me to satisfy his curiosity toward what drives optimal performance. Joining us is disaster professional Patrick Hardy, and at the heart of his work is helping folks understand what they do well and how they can find ways to make it better, so that no matter what it is they're planning to go through, there's always a way to find growth having gone through it. And welcome back into our most recent episode of Growth Ready, where I am so excited to be welcoming in Patrick Hardy into the show today. Patrick, we're going to get a little bit more into your story and your background once I allow you to answer the first question that I ask everybody now from the outset. Patrick, tell our listeners what it means to you to be growth ready.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me. I'm really looking forward to this. And what I tell people about growth is I say, before you can start to grow yourself, you really have to have a strong sense of self-identity of whatever you're doing. So one of the things that I discovered when I was a young disaster professional is that, I enjoyed being and working with people when they were dealing with hurricanes and earthquakes and tornadoes and things, just like what's going on in Florida right now or North Carolina. But one of the things that I discovered was when I opened my own business was that, it was great. You write plans, you help people with backpacks and stuff. And I realized something. I didn't have a sense of self. Who am I as a disaster professional? What is really my approach to disaster management then is different than someone else's? My father used to tell me this all the time. He had this quotation. It comes from Sir Isaac Newton, the famous mathematician from Great Britain, and it goes, if I have seen farther, it is because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And my father said, if you're going to stand on the shoulders of giants, you have an obligation for those who will stand on your shoulders after you to make some kind of contribution to move yourself forward. So when I became a disaster professional, I said, I'm going to find something so that I can make a contribution for the next set of planners. And so I think before one goes into any set of growth, before you decide you're going to grow into something else, you really have to have a strong sense of who you are. Because if you don't, then the foundation isn't there, and then you morph into something later that maybe you don't want it to do because you hadn't planned enough, you hadn't thought it through, you hadn't really considered who you were going to be. So those foundational principles simply don't exist. And when that happens, that's when I think people start going astray. So what I tell people is this: those fundamental principles, it's those foundational things that really allow you to have a growth mindset. And I think one of the issues with a lot of people is that, especially with the current zeitgeist in technology, which is grow as fast as you can. And one of the things that I tell young professionals all the time is I say, what is the best way for you to grow? Is to stop. Stop and think about who you are and what you want to be and where you want to go. Once you have developed that, now the steps become so much more logical, and now growth is so much more efficient. And that's how you truly become the professional that you're meant to be.
Love it. And so much already. And what I love about that response, firstly, is that the core of it is that need for us to really check in and center ourselves around who am I? What is it I bring to the table? What do I want to bring to the table? To really take that time and pause, as I call it in my world of coaching, is people try to sort of work on themselves in passing or in motion. It's just like, that's not necessarily the smart way to go because you're otherwise distracted. You're otherwise focused on something else. Self-growth, self-development really starts when you have that appetite and desire to press pause, to stop, as you say. But you've already alluded to your background there in that response too, which I really appreciate. And I want to go into that now because you are a disaster relief expert. You are someone who understands the world of disaster. And when I think of growth, knowing growth as well as I do, at some point adversity is going to come. And an extreme word like disaster presents all kinds of adversities naturally. But before we start getting into some of the intricacies around what you're doing right now and how you've gotten to this point, talk to us about how did you start on this path? Where did this passion for what you're doing today originate, and how did you get started?
Well, it actually happened when I was a swimmer in high school.
Fellow swimmer, let's go. We're both swimmers. Let's go. Love it.
Yeah, well, and the issue is that, I mean, you can't see me really, but I'm 5'10". I'm about middle build. Actually, I have kind of broad shoulders, and I was never going to be an Olympic swimmer. I was never going to be one of those types that was going to, break the, 100 IM record. I wasn't going to do any of that. But I joined swimming because I liked it. I mean, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in a very beautiful area of the country, very affluent area. And but I loved I loved going to the beach. I loved being in the water, whether it was in the the chlorination of a pool, or we actually had a man-made lake that was it was a freshwater lake, or going into the salt water of the ocean. So I really always enjoyed it. But so I joined the team, and they couldn't find a place for me. So they said, Patrick, would you be willing to be our long distance swimmer? So will you swim the 500, the 1,000, and the mile, which events that nobody wants to do? And They said, we're not expecting you to be competitive. We're not expecting you to win. But we have to have someone do those events. We can't scratch those events. And so I said, okay, fine, so I'll do it. And they never worried about me. I just went, and I'd swim them. I never won anything, and I didn't care. I just really enjoyed swimming. But then at the end of the swim season, they said, anybody who wants to become a lifeguard should do it. And the test for it was on a Saturday morning. You had to swim across a lake all the way. Then you swam from one end of the lake to the other end of the lake, and then you had to run. They gave you a hat. You put a hat on, you put a shirt back on, and then you run the entire length of the lake. And then you actually got to where you originally started, and then they actually had this rock that they actually placed in the water. And you actually had to run out into the surf, and you had to pull out this rock and put it onto the sand, and that's how you determine, and that was sort of the first physical test of becoming a lifeguard. So I did it, and I was competing against some of the guys I competed with in swimming, guys who are really good at the 100, really good at the 50, really good all this. But when it came to this, they just weren't used to going those longer distances, and I was in better fitness for that part of it, and I ended up doing very well. I became a lifeguard. And a lot of the guys quit; they didn't even make it. And so I was a lifeguard for a couple summers, and then I became an EMT, and so I worked on an ambulance. And at the same time, I was going to college, and I was studying, and I had a number of majors, but one of them was political science. And so what happened was, when you're in political science, when you study political science, everybody has a cause. Everybody has something that's important to them. Either you decide you're going to eradicate nuclear weapons, or you're going to solve world hunger, or you're going to do whatever you're going to do. Those things are really important to you. And I didn't have any of that. I didn't have any of that stuff. And so I just thought, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. So I graduated college. I was still an EMT, and then in August of 2005, you had Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
And it changed my life forever. And I didn't have any contacts over there. I didn't know anybody. I was just a college kid. So I wrote a letter. I actually wrote a physical letter to the governor of Louisiana. And I said, listen, I'm a nobody, but I graduated valedictorian in all my majors. I'm really determined. I want to be a great emergency manager. This clearly is a seminal event in emergency management, and I want to come work for you. And I actually got a call 2 days later, and they said, we've never gotten a letter like this before. We'd love to have you come here. We'll give you a free room and board. We'll give you a car you can drive around. We'll give you a whopping $1,500 a month. And any training you want in the country. Anything you want, and you'll get access to all of the leadership. You can go to any meetings you want to. You can do this amazing consulting with us, and but you agree to work 120 hours a week.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, sounds good. It sounds like the greatest deal I could have possibly imagined. And it was. It was
Yeah.
wonderful. You got to work because, before you can grow, right, as an emergency manager, you got to find everything about it. So I volunteered. I was volunteering with the Red Cross. I was doing amateur radio, because amateur radio is really emergency radio. And so, studying for those exams, going to anti-terrorism schools, going to every meeting on anthrax, every single thing I could possibly do, I did. And it gave me the most amazing education, because it gave me an idea about how these folks work. So that's really how I got into it. And then I worked for emergency management. I went overseas. I studied in Great Britain. I studied emergency management there while I was working a client contract. And then I came back. I won a business prize, and I started working with small businesses around the United States. So I worked with hundreds of thousands of small businesses, restaurants and bars and nursing homes and things. And so now I do content work. So that's really the evolution of my career, my growth mindset. So every single thing I did, I said, I'm going to challenge myself to do the next thing. And I did that. And here we are.
I love it. I love it. And already connections. You spent some time in Great Britain. I'm a Brit. You started off in Louisiana. Believe it or not, I'm based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So I know all these different stories. So
that's where I live.
Right. So all these interesting connections that we're now discovering about ourselves. I love it. And what I will say though, man, is, that first answer that you gave me when I asked you about being growth ready, as much as anything in that origin story, there was that immediate sense of self. And again, we're 18, we're 21, we're 24. We don't know exactly who we are, but for you to feel that gravitational pull towards something that truly excites you and to say yes to it, I think that is key to this story. Because again, were the terms ideal, 120 hours a week for $1,500 a month? Those aren't ideal terms, but does it bring you closer to that thing that you are drawn to? Absolutely. And does it give you an accelerated experience and education on all of these things that you feel yourself pull towards? 100%. And like that in itself, when you talk about the initiating of growth, when you get into the flow of growth, typically it takes a jump like that. Like that is a huge jump for someone to say, I'm going to move, I'm going to do all this work, I'm going to take on all these. There was so much new is what I'm hearing. Even though it was what you wanted, it was still very new at the same time. So I'm just curious, even if you can almost go back in time a little bit here and think back to that 05, 06 part in your life, what was it that made you feel as though, hey, not only is this something I want, but I'm ready and willing to take this step?
I wanted to take two things. First of all, I have a really strong intellectual curiosity, because actually when I was in college, I wanted to be a college professor. That's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to get a master's degree in international political science, because you have to remember, this is the age of 9/11. These are the years after 9/11 and then the invasion of Iraq, right? So there was a lot of geopolitical change going on, not only in the Middle East, not only in the United States, but in the Pacific Rim, right? So you had the issues with North Korea, which in 2004, they declared they had a nuclear weapon. The geopolitical changes going on in the People's Republic of China, and actually ended up living in China for a while too, because I wanted to get away and try to see another culture. But what the point is that I thought, becoming a professor was going to be it. But I had this itch that I wanted to go out, and so what I did was I merged my academic and intellectual interests with my vocational interests, which was as an EMS professional, responding to 911 calls, going out there every day. And I kind of poured them into a glass, because what I wanted to do was I said, I want to make a difference. And I want to be on a groundbreaking edge to change things and do things differently. And I said, I watched the screens just like everybody else. And I said, as I watched everything going on in Hurricane Katrina, I said, this is the most powerful nation that has ever existed, with essentially unlimited resources. A lot of people don't realize that, which really the U.S. federal government, in essence, has unlimited resources. They can get any resource anywhere they want, anywhere in the world, really. And I said, and this is the best that we can do? And I said, there's got to be a better way of doing this. So what it's going to require is brand new thinking, brand new people going in there. But when I first started working in Baton Rouge, first of all, you understand this better than anybody practically, is that there is a dramatic cultural difference between Louisiana and I want to say almost anywhere else.
Just about.
Really?
Just
'Cause I came
about.
from
Amen, brother. Amen.
yeah, I mean, because I came from the cloistered world of Orange County, California. So the contrast to everybody who's seen these things is you go from the Real Housewives of Orange County to True Detective. I mean, it really is like it's that big of a divorce. It's
That's right.
totally different. As a matter of fact, I tell people, if you've never been to Louisiana and you want to get an idea about what Louisiana's like, I mean, what it looks like and kind of how it feels, watch the first season of True Detective, because it gives you that essence of, I mean, not because of all the murders and stuff, but it's because the way that people drive around, the way the streets look, the way people interact with the detectives and with each other. It's a very interesting Southern way of doing things. But what I said was, I'm going to go to the South and I'm going to listen and I'm going to watch. And I had a wonderful boss. The boss I had, she was actually so good. She's actually one of my dearest, closest friends in the whole world to this very day, because she turned to me and she said, listen, you know, you not only work for me, I want you, I'm investing in you. I want you to be successful. And so I'm going to do everything I possibly can to put you in a position to do that. So she allowed me to do training. She let me do things. And I'm just going to correct you on one little thing, Steve. The only thing I'm going to correct you on, everything else is totally cool, is that this actually, $1,500 a month is not ideal, but it actually was the greatest deal I ever made in my life. Because to get an opportunity to work with these folks and do this stuff, that is it was a job unlike any other. And like, because I was actually, you're going to find this kind of interesting. I was on a business podcast about a month and a half ago, and I told the same basic story I told you, and I said, you know, I'm getting paid $1,500 a month. And so all of a sudden I started hearing this scratching. I heard this scratch, 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 scratch. And so I started answering one of the other questions, and he goes, and he actually calculated, he's like, that means you were only making like, you know, $2 an hour, or, you know, like 20 cents an hour. And I go, you don't get it. That isn't what mattered. I wasn't there to try to grow my financial position. I was investing in myself. Yes. And by not growing myself financially, just like I was telling you in the first question, right? It's not about, you know, growing yourself immediately financially. It's about putting yourself in a position where you can grow yourself and then put yourself in that right mindset to know who you are. Because you're absolutely right. 24-year-olds in many cases, I mean, this is the case for me. I had no idea who I was. And so being able to go through Hurricane Katrina and having a really supportive boss and being in a place where I just walked around with an intellectual curiosity and I said, I want to learn about what you do, and I want to learn about what you do, and I want to learn about what you do. And by the end of it, I said, I have a really good idea about where I want to go with this career.
Yep. And I love that you brought us back around to that comment of mine, because I think at the heart of it, that's very much what I was trying to get to, is that you knew why you were there. You knew why you were there. And what I enjoy about these conversations now that we get to have with this new reiteration of the pod is that growth, it's not going to be perfect circumstances. It rarely is it going to be perfect circumstances if you're trying to get a absolutely clear check mark in every single category that you can possibly look at in terms of finding that, you know, confirmation for making the right decision. But what you were able to do is to justify a strong enough why to say yes, that there were other things that you could just dismiss to the not necessarily accept, but actually just flat out dismiss. Just say, listen, it ain't about the money, it ain't about the amount of hours. It's about the opportunity to be in the right place at the right time in my life. And that is so often a big piece of where people go wrong in this growth journey, is that they find 3 reasons to say yes, and then they find 1 to say no. And for some reason, they want all 4 to align. It's like, well, no, what if that one that you're using as a reason not to, what if that one thing is going to eventually going to come around and eventually be what you want it to be? But for now, if those 2 or 3 things are justified as to why you should take that step, then take the step. That's what I'm hearing, is that you took the step because you could justify a strong enough why behind taking the step.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Is that I tried to sort of envision the future. I tried to see where I wanted to go. And I'm not going to lie to you, when I first arrived in Baton Rouge, 2 things hit me. Because this was August. First of all was the heat, the massive heat. I tell this to anybody, if you've never been in Baton Rouge heat, it's unlike any heat you've ever felt in your life, because it's like an oven, right? Because the humidity is so unbelievably high, and because the ground is so highly saturated with water, right?
It is
Essentially,
literally the closest thing to a slow cooker that a human being can experience. It
and
really
you know
is.
what's the thing? You know the thing, Steve. This totally came up. I really thought about this the first few weeks. Thankfully, emergency management was always super air conditioned. But I will say this: I have no idea how anyone lived in Louisiana prior to the advent of modern air conditioning and cooling administrations, because
Frightening to think about.
I don't know how anybody did that, but I will tell you this. I have unbelievable amount of respect for people who were able to live, for the Acadians and everyone else who were able to thrive and survive and develop this fascinating culture in this place where it is just so oppressively hot. And it is a very, but I will also say this. I'm sure you felt this too. The winter times are wonderful there. So I mean, I definitely, it's just definitely a great place. But the other thing I was going to say is that the other thing about it was, when you go into it with the attitude, because the second thing that hit me about Baton Rouge is when you get there, you get this kind of massive sense, especially after Hurricane Katrina. People I don't think really realize how civil administration in Louisiana at that time was absent, because there was so much chaos. And so, but I really thrived on the chaos, in the sense that I got to sit back and observe it without having to try to influence it. I just really got to see, how did we get here? And not to put blame and failure, because, when I run disaster drills all the time, this is what always happens. So we'll run a disaster drill, we'll run it someplace, there'll be managers involved and regular people involved. And afterwards, I always say, I'm just going to ask you guys two questions. First question is, what did we do well? And the second question is, how are we going to improve for next time? That's it. And I don't mean how did we fail or who was at fault. It's just, how can we collectively work better together? And that's really the message I tell people about responding to these kinds to hurricanes or to earthquakes, which is, you really have full control of the outcome. And that's one of the things, if you were to ask me, what did I really discover about Louisiana? That's what I discovered, is that in the end, we have full control of the outcome. We can't control the hurricane, but we can certainly control the outcome from the hurricane. And those are things that are important in our growth mindset, because if we decide that, we are, a slave to the elements, and that when we have these sort of massive environmental events, there's simply nothing we can do and it's totally out of our hands, that's not a growth mindset. That is a mindset of, I'm controlled by forces I can't do anything about, and it creates despondency with people. And that's why when people talk about, when they talk about the environmental issues of our day, not just climate change, but dealing with, larger earthquakes, with that sort of interaction with civil administration and our lives in the cities we live in, that people begin to say, there's just nothing I can do, and they throw their hands up. And that's why I say, no. And so whenever I go somewhere, I say, I'm your emergency planner. I'm not here to tell you how expert I am. That's not my job. My job is to show you how to grow and how you can be successful when you are dealing with a blank earthquake, hurricane, tornado, whatever, a tsunami, alien invasion, doesn't matter, right? It's putting you in that position to be successful. And I teach them, and this is what I really do, Steve. I say, I'm going to teach you to lead. I'm going to teach you how to lead in an emergency, because then people discover who they really are. Because like you and I were talking earlier, we have to find out who we really are. And I don't have a lot of time when I meet with clients to figure out who people are. So what I do is I sit with them and I say, I'm going to train you. I've been doing this long enough. I can extract that out of you. Even if you're reluctant to give it to me, I'm going to pull it out of you anyway. And it ends up being tremendous. It's the tremendous amount of growth that people go through when they discover, you know what? I really can do this. Yeah. What I hear in the media is totally false. I really can successfully negotiate through a disruptive event like a hurricane.
I love the fact that you just dropped that word, disruptive. We've used disaster, we've used hurricanes, we've used all these extreme words up to this point, and this is such a natural transition into really where you are right now and what you're doing in the work that you're doing today, the way you're impacting organizations, companies, people, etc. Is that, having looked into your story more, there's these two words that just keep coming up more and more and more. One is disruption, and then the other one is prevention, and how I have to assume the two go hand in hand. And the fact that you have now brought us into this disruptive piece, the insight that you just provided there a couple minutes ago around the hurricanes and our ability to actually control the outcome, while there is, in your world, there is so much real application of everything that you're talking about, in our worlds, there's a lot of metaphorical application to what you're saying. We are all dealing with, at some point, chances are within a quarter, within a year, our version of a hurricane within our respective businesses, within our respective lives, our organizations, whatever it may be. And this is where we now get into the disruptive piece. So when it comes to disruption, Patrick, I'd love to just sort of start with a pretty simple sort of ground defining way of getting into the heart of this, because I think it's really important here that we get to the heart of the true meaning and how you use the word and you use the term disruption. So when you think about the work that you're doing right now, help our listeners understand, when you use a term like disruption, where are you coming from? What angle are you coming from in that word?
And I'm glad you mentioned this, because you're right. This is the heart of what I do. And so let me kind of lay the foundation for you a little bit. First of all, I tell people this all the time. You never have to experience a disaster for the rest of your life. Never. And the message I do, in fact, in all the videos I create, is I say, if you prepare for a disaster, you'll never experience one. And I get messages sometimes from people going, what do you mean by that? And I say, well, what I want you to stop thinking about it is, I want you to stop thinking about a hurricane as a disaster, because it is not a disaster. A Category 5 hurricane is not a disaster. A 9.0 earthquake is not a disaster. They are not disasters. They only become disasters when you let them become disasters. And so what does that mean within the context? What it means is that in our lives, we decide to do something in our life. So when we're in business, we say, okay, this month I'm going to make this amount of profit, or I'm going to do this kind of growth, or this is going to happen, or that's going to happen. Then every once in a while, we get something that is disruptive to us, or is disruptive to our plan. And all that means is it's something that we didn't expect, that prevents us from getting to where we want to be. So whether that is a Category 5 hurricane, whether we're talking about AI or crypto or whatever it is, right? Some disruptive technology that's going to it's going to upend the way we do business. Mm-hmm. And what I say to them is, I say, when the disruption occurs, you now have two choices. Choice number one is you can become a bystander, right? You can just become a bystander, say there's nothing we can do, we just need to be reactive and this and that. And then you know what ends up happening, Steve? It descends. It becomes you basically stand by and become a bystander. Then it turns into a crisis. Now it's an emergency, and now it's a disaster, right? Because now, and what I mean by the word disaster is when it makes you weaker, when you are weaker afterwards. Because the other option is that you can take command of it. And I have a system I call the C3 method. I tell people, I say, this is what will transform the disruption into making you stronger afterwards, is taking command. And by taking command, I mean is you decide, I'm not going to let someone else handle it. I'm in charge of this. Meaning, I fully control the outcome of whatever this is. Then communicating, meaning you build a team around you, right? You build a team around you of people and experts, in other words, and resources that can help you. And then in the end, you execute the tasks. So the command, communicate, and carry out. That's the system I tell people. And sometimes people ask me about it, and they say, well, I don't understand how those two things, necessarily contrast, in the sense of how do you get to that point? Well, and I say the first assumption you need to make is, whenever there is a disruptive event, you need to decide this: if I do nothing, no one else will either. That's what I tell people. You got to say that to yourself. If I do nothing, no one else will either. Because the problem becomes when people say, if I do nothing, that's okay, someone else will handle it for me. And that's what happens so many times, right? I hear this all the time from business owners saying, well, I have, the insurance company will take care of it, or the government will handle it. The government will take care of this, or FEMA will come to my rescue. And I'm telling you something, I've been through real disasters before where they really were disasters. And they're not going to be there for you. So what I say to folks is I say, you have to have a mindset that you're in charge of your own growth. You have to be in charge of that during a disruptive event. And what people will end up discovering? They will discover that if you take command of what's going on, you take leadership, you say, this is my disruption. I am responsible for what happens. I develop a team around me and I execute those tasks. What you find is not only was it never a disruption, the disruption actually was to your advantage. You actually took it and put it in a way that made you stronger and better and more profitable, or whatever it is. Those are the things that become really, really important. When you stand by and become a bystander and say, I'm just going to allow it to descend into a crisis, then it gets worse, now it's an emergency, and now it's a disaster, that's when the really negative impacts occur. We become weaker, less profitable, we have less control. But I tell people, in the end, you can't control the disruption, but you can control the outcome.
I love it. It's so important to bring this back to even just your background there with Louisiana and my current experience. I've been living here for almost 12 years now.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, long time. And for me, one thing that I've obviously heard so many times over the years is everyone's account of experiencing Katrina. And to your point, so much of the chaos that ensued around it and the lessons that were learned from what is going to go down, obviously, is one of the top 2 or 3 disasters that have happened during our lifetimes and maybe for many generations to come. And here's where everything that you're talking to here, Patrick, really does come full circle with that experience of Louisiana, is that I've been here now for a number of different hurricanes. We've had a great flood in 2016, a couple of hurricanes pretty recently as well. And it never ceases to amaze me the way in which New Orleans specifically responds to these acts of nature now. I'm going to learn here. I'm going to let you coach me here and not use that word disaster, because New Orleans has done a phenomenal job in the last 10 to 15 years since Katrina to respond accordingly to potential disasters. And I'll give you a really quick story. My wife and I were about to celebrate our 5-year anniversary a couple years ago, and there was a hurricane that was coming in. It went through New Orleans. We couldn't go that weekend. We had to wait what we thought would be a few months. 2 weeks later, we're in New Orleans, and you would never know that this thing came through. And based on the footage that we saw just 2 weeks prior, it definitely created some damage, but the response was phenomenal because of that willingness to not be a bystander, for all these small businesses to say, we are all responsible in how we bounce back from this. And everything that you're talking to here, Patrick, is so relevant to any individual in their respective growth journey. It is way too easy to stand by and assume that people will either support you or pick up the pieces for you. Trust me, there are human elements where we want to believe that that is true, and there will be cases where that is the case. However, to assume that that will always be the case is where it's going to leave you weaker after. Like, you are preaching right now, brother, to me in terms of just what I believe in and some of my philosophies. And I'm just curious, when you think about the work that you're doing right now, what does that shift look like within an organization, within some of these, maybe even state institutions that you're working with, to whatever extent it may be? What does that shift look like when they do move? They get it. They move from the bystander mindset and they start to take this more commanding mindset.
Treat everything else like ice cream. And that when I was a little boy, I used to have dinner every night, with my parents and my brother. And I would always look forward, just like every little kid seemingly does, we look forward to dessert, right? You get through the broccoli so you can get to dessert. And I was so used to having ice cream every night. And so anyway, my parents, for some reason, they decided they just didn't want to do it. So what happened was I was eating dinner and I finished up and I said, okay, I'm ready for ice cream. And my mom was like, well, you're not going to have ice cream tonight. I was like, well, wait a minute. This is a natural progression. This is the sequitur in this, to put it in sort of adult language.
We had a deal.
This is the, This is the implied deal. You
Right.
provide dinner. I eat the greens that I don't like to eat, which, by the way, I actually like the greens now far more than the
That's right.
sugar. I don't know. It's a sort of that natural evolution as an adult, I guess. But then you give me the green stuff that I really like, which is mint chocolate chip was always my favorite as a kid. So, and she said, you need to learn something about this. I'm going to tell you something about ice cream. It's nice, but not necessary. And so,
Wow.
and I think about that. And so I tell this to every single person. And I do this actually, it's so funny because when I'll keynote in front of 200-300 people, and I'll stand in front of everybody and I'll say, when you think about the insurance company and you're paying these people, right, to come out and give you money if you have some kind of emergency or you're dealing with FEMA or you're dealing with, the electric company, whatever. Here's what I want you to assume, that they're not coming to help you. So I want you to treat them just like ice cream. They're nice, but not necessary. In other words, if they're not available and they can't help you for a while, and the insurance company, but there are instances, and you can understand, you live in hurricane zones. There are areas where the insurance isn't going to cover it. Matter of fact, there are a lot of instances, wildfires out here in California, where a lot of business owners were shocked that that they were not covered, and they thought they were. COVID is another huge deal. Very, very few people, even insurance and risk professionals that I know, hadn't read through the policies and realized that if whatever you are experiencing involves a virus, basically the insurance company disclaims entirely. So the entire companies that had been paying up to insurance for years went out of business because they hadn't read the fine print. So one of the things I tell people is I say, treat the insurance companies, FEMA, the president, everybody, just like ice cream. Nice, but not necessary. Then you get into this place where you're on your own and you say, if I do nothing, no one else is going to do anything either. And I know that sounds cold, but if you do that, then you put yourself in a place where, wow, all of a sudden, FEMA does provide me something. I wasn't expecting it. I certainly was not demanding it. And it came to me. And then what's the thing, Steve? And I discovered this as a kid too, because my parents didn't give me ice cream every night anymore. All of a sudden, it just happened to occur every once in a while. But you know what? That ice cream tasted so much sweeter when you realized you weren't going to have it every night. And that's when the relationships get better, because people say, I can be independent, I can do things on my own, and then you have others to actually help you. So that's one of the things that I really emphasize to folks all the time. So as a matter of fact, I'm just going to mention this one thing. In a few weeks, I'm actually going to run a disaster drill, which is going to be on YouTube, on my YouTube channel.
Cool.
And the entire drill, everyone involved in the drill, the entire thing. So we're going to do a full shelter in place and evacuation drill. It's going to be a whole earthquake drill. Every single person involved, every single one is deaf or hard of hearing. There will be no hearing people involved. And I'm going to tell them everything you have to do entirely on your own. And I'm going to do that to prove to people that no matter what is going on, you can handle it. And I'm going to train them how to do it, and then they will do it on their own. And it's going to be an amazing event. I'm really excited about it, actually. But that's the kind of thing I do and talk to people, because if you put yourself in a position where you feel independent, then you can grow without feeling like you have to hold on to someone else's coattails to get where you need to be.
I appreciate you mentioning that. We're gonna put that information. I'm gonna do my best to work with my team to make sure this comes out before that, just so we can actually bring some attention to that. I think that would be a phenomenal thing. And again, it's on YouTube. I'm sure it'll be something people can access if you're hearing this after the date. But nonetheless, what an incredible example of what you're speaking to here. The metaphor works for me on so many levels, on a much more personal level than I'm ever willing to admit when it comes to my relationship with ice cream. But what I will say is that
it's one of those things we don't want to talk about as adult, but we always secretly say, that's my guilty pleasure.
Necessary. Don't tell me ice cream's not necessary, Patrick. I'm not here for that. Anyway, the what I will say, though, is that when we talk about just simply the environment in which to grow, my question was framed around that shift mentally, that cultural shift. And so much of what you're talking to here is just imagine what it would mean to be a part of a team that are so independently accountable, being accountable to a way of behaving, that what that might do for the response as and when it's necessary to respond. But at the same time, to your point, the sheer magnitude of appreciation when those things that are nice but aren't necessarily necessary, when they do come, when they do happen for you, it's only going to bring people closer together in their shared appreciation for those moments of success, of growth, whatever it may be. And I think that is, again, it's a great metaphor. It's one that I personally, when I think about the nice versus necessary, especially as an entrepreneur myself and the clients that I work with as an executive coach, it's such a valuable insight to be able to say to someone or ask the question simply, listen, is this ice cream right now? Is this something that you're trying to define and make necessary when really at the heart of it, it's simply something that would be nice to have in this moment?
Yeah, and what you're basically saying is that if you have that independence, right, if you're able to do that entirely on your own, then everything else is great. I mean, I'm not saying deny yourself those things. If those resources are available, key word there, if. I can't tell you the number of times where you'll read, and this will happen, I promise you, 2-3 months down the road, Steve, you and I will read this in, online and online articles and things. It'll say, people will say, I thought that they were going to do this. They promised us X. They promised they would do this, and they didn't come, or they didn't do it. So one of the things I tell my clients all the time is I say, just assume they're not going to come. That's how we plan. Then all of a sudden, everything you do is going to make you better because you're going to handle it on your own because we're not dependent on anyone else. Again, we assume if I do nothing, no one else is going to do anything either. By doing that, that puts us in an ideal position to be successful. The other thing I recently did about a month ago, I did 28 hours of nonstop CPR. So I broke a world record. I was really excited about it. That's another video. I'm actually going to be putting that up. I had some great sponsors, and I did it. And some people said to me, well, you're a disaster guy. Why would you do CPR for that long? And I would say it's exactly part of my philosophy, which is there are going to be instances where someone is going to have a cardiac event, and if that happens, you have to decide, am I going to do something about it, or am I going to hope that someone else will do something about it? CPR is the ultimate assertive event where you go in there, it's you. You are acting entirely on your own. And I did it for 28 hours so I could turn to audiences and said, well, if I could do it for 28 hours, you can do it for, 10 minutes or 20 minutes. And so I did that because I just thought I want to put people in a position to realize that if there are people around, fantastic. If they're not, fantastic. Who cares? I treated them like ice cream. Nice, but not necessary. In the end, I can do the CPR on my own. The people who are deaf and hard of hearing, they can do the evacuation on their own. I have ones on children. We've got some incredible videos coming out, all emphasizing the same thing, which is about the things that the way that you and I think about, when we train clients. I do coaching as well. When I coach clients, I coach, high net worth clients and Fortune 500 companies sometimes hire me, and I'll just sit and do some coaching with them, and I'll say, you see this 12,000 page disaster plan? You see that 12,000 page disaster plan? That plan means zip. Nothing. If you guys are not putting yourselves in a position where you are taking responsibility of it on your own, if you're expecting other people to bail you out, that is when companies get in trouble. And it is my job to show you how to make that 12,000 page document better. And so I'm going to do it by showing you how you can be more independent and taking command of a disruptive event before it becomes a disaster.
Beautiful. Well, I am, as we record this, Hurricane Milton is working its way to Florida, and it could literally be there in a matter of hours based on the time that we're actually recording this. And so with that, we have a very strong cutoff here today, so you can actually hop on a meeting to attend to some of the prevention work that's going to be taking place for some of your clients. And with that being said, but before I let you go, Patrick, obviously I'm going to give you a chance just to share with everybody where we can learn more about you. But I really want to see and ask of you, if possible, how we can now tie everything that you're speaking to here towards high performance, because I know that is a big part of what you do. It is what you speak to a lot of the time is how can we use some of these disruption and prevention approaches that you take? How can we look at some of these concepts that you're providing and not just use it as a way to simply survive, but a way to actually thrive, as you've alluded to, that we can actually grow and get better. So from that perspective of the high performer, I would love for you maybe just to wrap it up here with just some insight around how this work really facilitates the high performer.
What I want you to do in your companies is this when you guys do your next disaster drill, and I'm going to call it disaster drill because that's what everybody calls it, but
Sure.
really to me it's like a disruptive drill. Okay, so if you're going to do, let's say you decide you're going to do an earthquake drill or a tornado drill, here's what I want you to do. As the high performer, I want you to do nothing. Zero. I don't want you to do anything during that drill. And what I want you to do is I want you to take the least experienced employee that you have, the person with the least experience, the person who's been working with you the least, the one who has the least interesting title imaginable. You know that person that would get really wide-eyed if you put them in charge? I want you to put them in charge. And I want you to do that. Because here's the thing, what I have learned about high performance, and I've run companies, a really successful small business for 15 years, and the way that I do it is I turn to my employees and I empower them. That is what this is about. When you have a disruptive event, if you can't empower the people around you, how does that make you a better performer? Because I have found the best high performers are the ones who empower their teams, the ones who make their teams stronger and better. And so what I say is put that person in charge, give them a little training, and then try it out. That will tell you everything you need to know about how well your team is going to perform during a disruptive event. That is why that is so important to actually do. I do this all the time. I do a derivative of this where actually I'll take we'll have a drill and I'll have all the managers in there and everything, and I'll say, and they'll be expecting it. I'll turn all the employees and I say, who do you think should be in charge of this disaster drill today? Who do you think should be actually doing things? And they'll always point to the boss. And I'll say, the boss is in Tahiti. Next. And they'll say, oh, so-and-so. He's in jury duty. Next. And they'll say, and I'll just go down the list. I'll just make up fake excuses. So-and-so has a kid sick, you know what I mean? And then eventually They go, well, we can't be in charge. I go, why not?
Why not?
You can be. We just have to position you properly to make you successful. High performance teams, and I'm sure you deal with them all the time, Steve. There's no high performance person I've ever met in my life who didn't have a high performing team behind them. Even if you think about Tiger Woods or you think about great sports athletes, they all have great teams around them, great coaches, great people. And that's what you have to do. If you haven't empowered the people around you, if you haven't put them in a position to be successful, then they cannot take command, they can't communicate with you, and they can't carry stuff out. And that's what is the difference maker, because if you assume someone else is going to take care of it, the guy who has the best job title, if you think they're going to take care of it, you know what you have? You've now created a bunch of bystanders, and that is not how you create high performance and true growth, whether it's a business, a community, or a family.
Yeah, and it's such a wonderful life cycle that we've gone through in this 45 minutes. Is that think about how you answered that first question around self-identity. Nothing is going to help a person really connect to who they are and their capability in those moments than being empowered by the people that are supposed to, in the eyes of the rest of the company or the rest of the group or whatever it is, these supposed leaders in these moments. What if those supposed leaders turned around and said, actually, I want you to lead. I want you to be assertive. I want you to be the resourceful one in this kind of a moment. Oh, shoot. Now I need to check in with me. How can I work on me? How can I develop me? Right. And the life cycle of this just becomes so organic and so wonderfully filled with momentum in order to just continue to serve that growth. So, man, Patrick, I could spend a lot of time in your world for a lot longer, and there's so many wonderful ways of this can be, applicable to, in a metaphorical sense, in a real sense, to so many areas of growth. But listen, brother, already appreciate the generosity of time that you got to spend with us today. Before I let you go, where can we learn more about you? How can we remain connected in your work?
Well, you can find me. My website is disasterpatrick.com. I keynote, just like my friend Steve here. I keynote. I do executive coaching and training. So if you just want me for an hour or two just to talk like this, I totally can. And I do use a lot of hand gestures. The other thing is, too, I have a brand new YouTube page where we're putting up I'm taking on the biggest disaster challenges in the world. So I've stopped being an active day-to-day CEO. I've hired somebody who's taken over that role at my company. And so now I take on really difficult disaster challenges. So some of the videos are coming up. We were talking about the one with people who are deaf and hard of hearing, developing a drill for them. I also built FEMA's first fully rated hurricane shelter. and I built it entirely out of Lego blocks. And so we actually test it in front of a wind tunnel, and you will see how we officially developed the very first one. I did it with a Lego architect. We had a lot of fun. It was amazing. I'll be doing CPR in 155 mile per hour winds. We're going to do so many interesting things. A lot of different kinds of fascinating challenges, because I just want to show people that in the end, if you prepare for a disaster, you really will never experience one. You just have to remember, you have to take command, you have to really communicate, develop that team around you, and start executing those tasks. It doesn't matter what your job title is or what you do, it's how you are empowered that truly turns that disruption into a chance to be stronger, more successful, and have that outcome that you truly want from that. So, and my YouTube channel is Disaster Patrick. Thank you very much for having me, Steve. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking with you, and I enjoyed talking with all the rest of you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to connect again.
I appreciate you, Patrick. All that information will be in the show notes, brother. This has just been an absolute wonderful experience, a very unique take on the show, and I'm all for it. So thanks again for the time, brother. And my thanks again to Patrick for joining us on the show. And there is something that Patrick provided to us that I simply have to re-emphasize, even though I did it a couple times while we were in the discussion one last time. And it is that of when we experience a disruption, do we want to be a bystander or do we want to take command? Every single day, at some point, there's going to be an interference. There's going to be a disruption to what we do and how we're trying to do it. It comes in all different shapes and sizes. What does that look like for you? What do those consistent disruptions, those things that throw you off your game, look like? And when they happen, how do you respond? Is it an immediate response every single time? Does it seem reactionary? Or is it thought out? Is it deliberate? Is it intentional? You know, you can respond quickly when any of these interruptions do come your way. But at the heart of the action itself, are you owning? Are you taking command for how you are behaving and how you are choosing to move and react, respond, fill in the blank to that moment? If you can say confidently that you command the situation when these disruptions arrive, then chances are you're finding ways to move forward despite the interruption. So no longer should we be bystanders in our growth journey. We must ready ourselves to take command. Think about what that might look like within your world. Start to identify the likeliest disruptions. As you start to get clearer on what it is and how it is you can be disrupted, then you can definitely take those initial steps towards owning it and taking command of the situations as and when they arrive. So, let's all agree. Let's become commanders. No longer should we be bystanders, folks. That is not what growth is about, and that is certainly not what Patrick was encouraging us to do. But on that note, I'd love for you to take command of subscribing to this podcast. Make sure you're taking the time to do that. Okay? It's so important. The content is going to consistently keep coming, and it's going to consistently be of this high standard. I cannot be more excited for the continuation of the guests that we have coming your way. So be subscribed to the show. Make sure you're dropping us a rating as well before you are done. And don't be selfish. Share this show. Share it with people in your world that you know can stand to benefit from some more growth-ready insights. That's it from me this time. Best of luck to you in everything and anything you've got going on in your world. And I look forward to doing this again with you very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Growth Ready. If you liked what you heard and are feeling ready to grow, be sure to leave a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share the episode with someone you know is ready to fuel their growth journey today. We love our community, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@growthready.com. And until next time, we are Growth Ready, and you will be too.